Like I said, I'm blown away by the response to Break Free from Suckville. This was a book that um, easily took 3.5 years of my life writing and putting together. And it wasn't because I didn't love the topic or didn't love the material. It was the fact that the first couple drafts sucked, in all honesty. And I hope the final product didn't suck. But um, I couldn't quite get the message across of what I wanted. And I knew deep down what I wanted to get across was this idea that the that we often dig ourselves our own hole into our own shortcomings because of our expectations and our um, kind of our mental frameworks, right? And I know we've all read the books, we've all seen the conversations about how important failure is and all that other stuff. And while I believe in that, right, and I would tell you, of course, you've got to fail to succeed, but I don't want us to have to fail. What I want us to do is have a framework mentally of what it takes and what that drives. So Suckville came about. If you've read the book, you know it. It came about because of a conversation I'd had with a couple players. A couple players were describing the fact that they never seemed to give themselves any credit. They never gave themselves any compliments. They never gave themselves um, any grace. And every day was this failing. And what they couldn't see was the fact that they were growing beautifully through their game and they were doing great things, but it just couldn't be good enough. And I talked about it in the book, but there was a person that I had. Um, there was a there was a there was a person that I had that I was seeing in college, and this athlete I talk about in the book. She had a pretty tragic or career-threatening foot injury. And the foot injury was something that they told her, said, look, you may be able to come back and run, you may not be able to. And for a year and a half, I worked with her on trying to deal with the question of terminating her career and ending early and going on in life and leaving her athletic prowess behind, right? And finally, she came in one day and she said, you're not going to believe it, but they're going to let me go because it's not going to change the long-term plan. It's all based on what I can tolerate and play. And I was like, great, let's go. What do we have to lose at this point, right? And 6 weeks, 3 months later, she comes in and we're getting ready for the season. The season starts, and 2 weeks into the season, she's like, I just don't understand why I can't run as fast as I want to run. And it was this total change and flip between I just want to have a chance to do it versus now undercutting herself and not allowing herself to have success because it wasn't following the plan that she thought she should achieve. And I reminded her, I said, 3 months ago, all you wanted to do was just get back out there and run again, and you would take anything that came your way. And at the end of the day, it's still not good enough, is it? Isn't that funny? Like, we just never can accept our own progress. We can compliment other people all day long. We can tell people how great they're doing. We can tell people how much success is happening. But for us, it's never enough. Now, genetically, evolutionarily wise, all those factors, we can never be truly content on what we do. We cannot accept good enough because if we did, we'd put ourselves at risk of never growing. So therefore, our mind is built to see shortcomings. We all look in the mirror, we see our shortcomings. We see things that other people don't see. If you go into a room that has 4 or 5 mirrors, it's terrifying because self-reflection is the hardest. And I think maybe that's why psychologists have a great opportunity is sometimes to listen because people just verbalizing it realizes that not that far off. I'm actually doing better than I thought. But until you verbalize it, until you take a step back and take a look at it, it's one of those crazy things where it's just never good enough. And what happens is over time that builds into Suckville. I had an NFL football player call me last week. A football player's in a situation where he's in the midst of Suckville. He's like, I've dreamt my entire life of playing in the NFL. I'm in my 6th, 7th, 8th year, and I absolutely despise the game. I can't stand the misery of the game, the misery of the business, waking up on a Monday morning hurting, the pressure my wife feels, not being near my kids. And he just listed all these negatives associated with playing football. And so I asked a simple question. I said, why would you play? If you're so much in Suckville right now, why do you play? And he said, well, I used to love it. So you obviously don't love it now. So what is it about the game that you love so much? And he started listing it. And I said, what changed with those things that you listed? Challenging myself on the barriers, putting myself out there, doing and trying to see how good I can become. I said, what changed? I said, everything that changed in your game was an external pressure. You internalized the external pressure and carried the burden of the potential of falling short. And as a result, you're miserable at the game. The game has now become a burden versus a job. I'll even take it as a job level. But what happens is, as coaches, oftentimes we say, just go out there and have fun again. And for athletes, they just can't do that. It's not fun. Go have fun running your knee into the side of a desk over and over and over again. And tell me how much fun that is. It's not fun. There's nothing fun about it. So one of the things that you have to look at in our society is, where are we right now? What are we doing? And I'm going to take a step back here for a second, and I'm going to kind of paint the picture of where we are in our youth and our youth athletes, because I think it's really, really important to understand so that we understand us. Look, everybody talks about the younger generation as different, but I hate to tell you, you were younger, you were different than the generation that preceded you. You know, if you take a look at the flip-flops that happened during the course of the generations, it's quite amazing at how people, all of a sudden are, in a different spot, right? They're, the 70s led to the 80s, the 80s led to the 90s, and the 90s led to the 2000s, and so on. And every single year it was different. It's never the same. And so when we knock the kids that come after us, or we knock the kids that are, in those situations that they're following us and saying, they don't listen, they're same as us. So when I take a look at the generational differences, it's important for us to understand that we are all different, right? What determines excellence in general? And when you take a look at this generation and you wonder why they're in Suckville if we're coaches, or why we fall into Suckville ourselves, is that the standards by which we measure ourselves is completely skewed. When I was growing up, we had a baseball, from a baseball standpoint, my senior year in high school, there was a kid that was going to be the unbelievable, never miss, can't miss Major League Baseball prospect by the name of Todd Van Poppel from Texas. Todd Van Poppel was a surefire major leaguer and was going to be the #1 pick in the draft. Now, we all knew who Todd Van Poppel was because of Baseball America. We didn't really know anybody else. Well, Todd Van Poppel had such unrealistic financial demands that the Atlanta Braves said, you know what, we're not going to draft him. And they passed. And they drafted a kid by the name of Chipper Jones. None of us knew who Chipper Jones was. We were like, who the hell is this guy? Like, shortstop from Jacksonville, Florida, never heard of him. But our kids today pick up their phones. We pick up our phones. We look at what other coaches, teachers, teams, people are doing. And we go, I want that. You don't know them. You don't know how many edits it took to get there. You don't know anything. So our comparison sample that we have in our world today is completely skewed. And it creates unrealistic expectations. It creates unrealistic pressures. It creates frustrations that are mounting, because if player X, coach X, company X is at this point, why can't I be there? Right? How many of us have heard the story of Spanx, right? Sarah Blakely started it with $5,000 of selling copying machines. And yet she started by cutting pantyhose feet off to wear an undergarment under her clothes. And she just sold it for $1.6 billion this week and was a wholly owned company. How many people used her as the analogy or the standard? She's the freaking outlier. That's not normal. She had probably a tough path of raising Spanx into a worldwide leader. But for every Sarah Blakely, there were thousands of people who did everything right that struggled that we never saw. But we highlight that. Kids come to me and they say, well, Tiger did this. Tiger's the greatest outlier in the history of sports ever. There is nobody who changed a game single-handedly like he did. Serena Williams, outlier. Simone Biles, outlier. Michael Phelps, outlier. They are not the standards. The standards are people you don't even know. because they create the average. Now, I'm not saying I want us to be average. What I'm saying is we lock in because of our phones, our Instagram, we see this idealized world. And the kids today, I don't mean this in a bad way, oh, kids, but what happens is they put so much more pressure on themselves. Youth sports right now is estimated, it was 15 billion when I wrote the book. Now it's a $19 billion a year annual market. And as a result, there's a lot of exchange of information in order for an expectation of a result. You can't continue to invest in a coach that can't produce results, even on the high school level. It is amazing to watch high schools fire coaches because they're not winning enough. And they don't recruit, supposedly. They get who comes into their school district, and yet they have to win. And we wonder why our anxiety rates are going through the roof. There was a beautiful article written this past week in Golf Digest, if you're golf centric, from Daniel Rappaport. I was supposed to have him on an Instagram live tomorrow, but I'm having to postpone it. But talking about the mental health burden in the game of golf. Players like Matthew Wolff, Bubba Watson, and so on have talked about the anxiety and the burden that comes with having to play, the pressure of losing your job. Well, we feel the same way as coaches, as parents, everything. There was a stat that came out a couple of years ago prior to the transfer portal in the NCAA that 14% of males have transferred, 10% of females have transferred. Now with the transfer portal where the NCAA is going to allow them to have one free transfer at any time in their career, in undergrad, those numbers are going to be upwards of 1/3, in my opinion. When they get to grad school, they're free to transfer again. So you're going to see players that have gone to 3 schools over a 5-year period. Now, does that mean that they're weak? No. That may mean that they're not getting what they need, or they got beat out and they're looking for a new opportunity. Because this generation, and we're a part of it, y'all, patience is not rewarded. Patience is what you have to have when success doesn't come fast enough. If you're really good, you don't need to be patient. And that's the biggest misconception that we have. Well, how do you think Suckville gets started? We don't have the long game plan. We have the short-term reinforcement cycles that are quicking and making it faster and faster for us to go. And if you told a kid, you told a person, hey, just wait. We had this conversation with a buddy of mine who's a CEO of a company, very, very large company. And I said, if you get a resume in today's game, in today's world, do you worry if they've gone through 4 or 5 jobs in 4 or 5 years? Said, nope, not at all. Doesn't bother me at all. I said, why? Because if I see somebody who's been in the same job for 20 years, I wonder why they haven't left. And I was like, oh my gosh, 20 years ago, people who were frequent jumpers, what's wrong with that person? Now somebody's been at the same position in an entry level or young position for 20 years, where they're not motivated, they're not willing to move, they're not flexible. Our dynamic of how we change things and evaluate has changed. As a result, as I said before, anxiety and depression are through the roof right now. I would say that 50% of the athletes that I see, I could diagnose with an anxiety disorder, even in the college ranks. College athletes have nearly the same rate of mental health impairment as the traditional student population. And I would tell you that most of the college athletes are exhausted, worn out, frustrated, and beaten down. And yet it's the greatest 5 years of my life. Well, before I got married and had kids, okay. But you got to remember too, it's hard. And so what we've taught people to do is to say, wait a minute, if this is what I'm feeling, there's got to be a faster, quicker way out of this. Because what happens is we get settled on this idea that if I can't solve it now, there's got to be a new route around it versus I'm going to solve the puzzle in front of me. I'm going to work through it. The thing that drives all this is 2 components. Number 1 is uncertainty of the future, and number 2 is uncertainty of self. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know who I am. We never really know who we are, and we sure as hell never know what the future holds. So what happens is we're playing a game that's very reactionary, and that reactive nature results in us chasing our tails, getting lost, trying many different things. Uncertainty drives struggle. You've got to have struggle to succeed. If the game was easy, if the level that you worked at was too easy, you wouldn't be challenged. So the fact that people are struggling is not a sign of a problem. It's a sign of a solution that hasn't yet been found. And that's the thing that you have to let people know. But as a coach, for our coaches on here, how long do we want to let a player struggle? Because they may hit the road. Their parents may call and say, you know what? We're not getting anywhere. I had a player years ago, I always laughed at. A player worked with me for about 6 months on their golf game, and I got fired by the dad because it wasn't going fast enough. The kid won the next 3 junior tournaments he was in. And I was like, okay. I mean, maybe he fired me, freed him up, and he played great. I think about John Tillery, a good buddy of mine who's a golf instructor out of Georgia, worked with Brandt Snedeker. The week Brandt left him on a Monday, Brandt shot 59 on Thursday and won the golf tournament. John's like, do you think anything changed? It's just maybe he got impatient. So what happens is that impatience towards that uncertainty and that lack of belief of what we're going to face starts digging this little hole. Well, the faster we try to go and get out of it, the faster we dig. The faster we dig, the deeper we go, until the next thing we know, we're looking up and going, ah, crap. Now I'm really stuck and I've hit rock bottom. This book was written because the number of people that come to see me who are at rock bottom, that's the number one reason people come in. They're frustrated and it's not going fast enough. And they get stuck in a position where every day they feel like they're going just to make the donuts. Like, I'm just doing this. I'm just beating my head into the door. But somewhere along the line, someone told them that this is supposed to be fun, and this is supposed to be joyous, and this is supposed to be engaging, and you're supposed to just love the game. So now we have uncertainty, we have impatience, we have uncertainty of self, and we have misunderstood values in the game. So you have to look at it and say, all right, what's the solution here, right? Well, there's a couple myths that I think are in all sports. The first myth is you can't cut out your human emotion. You can't be calm. You can't be relaxed. You can't be free of thought. None of those exist. If you're truly engaged in what you want to do, you're an emotional being. Emotions make us great. It allows us to connect to the challenge. If you read the Mindside Manifesto, though, you understand that the first emotion we experience is fine. It's the second emotion that sits on top of it and crushes us. So I'm fine saying this is hard. But when I say, why is it always so hard for me and everyone else always gets the breaks? We're taking that uncertainty of the future and starting to define an injustice. And we can never win the injustice in our own head. Too many people think that they train, they compete to their best. We don't train to take our tools from X in training and it transfers to the competition. It doesn't exist. What transfers are tools. You refine your tools in your training. You apply those tools to an uncertain challenge with an uncertain outcome. There's no way that you know what you're going to need until you face it. And in many sports, you can compete off of an opponent. But individual sports like running or like cross country stuff, those are very individualized, even though they're running against a crew. Golf and some of the other factors like that gets really, really hard when there's not a known competitor. Because we've heard forever, well, you compete against yourself. Oh, hell no, you don't compete against yourself. Because you never win. You don't compete against yourself. You compete against the uncertainty of the challenge. And you try to get the best you can out of it. You try to steal whatever you can from it, and you fight through it. And what happens is that when we're competing against ourselves and trying to live up to this standard and thinking that the game should be, should have justice associated with it, that hole gets deep and we're yelling and screaming, trying to ask for help. But the true help is not from the outside. It's not from somebody else that's going to show us the way. You may bring in a coach that's a guide that can show you what you need to do. But ultimately, you have to be the one that does it. And the way you do it is the way you change your mindset. Is you realize that Suckville is not a curse against you. It's not you suck. It's not why am I failing all the time. It's what's the lesson I need to learn right now. In my mind, every lesson you have will get repeated until you solve the puzzle. And it'll just get harder and harder and harder until you solve the challenge. If you were playing a video game, and looking at the crowd here, there's probably not a lot of people that have played on the newer video game platforms, but that's okay. I don't either. But the games are hard. You go on these campaigns and you advance. And every level of those games start off with giving you a little confidence. Okay, let's do this. Let's call it Angry Birds. We've all played Angry Birds, right? You start off and you knock over some things and you win. And then the next challenge is a little harder. You solve that. Then the next one's going to require you to learn a new skill. It's going to learn a new apparatus. It's going to learn a new button pushing process. You're going to have to jump over something, whatever it is. You've got to learn a new skill. You learn the skill, then you go to the next one. And the next one teaches that in a better process. And then you get to the end and you've got to be able to use that in a really hard challenge. And then you solve it. And you win the level. And you go to the next level. And you start that process all over again. Success, journey, competition, it's like climbing a mountain. Every step of the way, you have to go up to a new step. And every step of the way, you got to learn. You got to learn what it's like to be, I said in the book, people want to, it's never enough, right? I want to start. Then I want to start at the right position. Then I want to be the coach's ideal. Then I want to be all district, all state, all American, right? You got to learn what it's like to be each of those people. You got to learn what it's like to be the number one team in the country. You got to learn what it's like to be the best coach in the region. You got to be the one to know what it means that every time you go into a gym, everybody's there to compete against you. And everybody's gearing up for you. After, I think it was my freshman year, we looked at the number of press booklets that opposing teams had the next year. We were on the cover of 5 of our opponents' media guides for the year they beat us. But we won the national title. It didn't matter. But everybody measured their success against us. Alabama football, everybody measures their success against Alabama football. Well, the problem with that is if you're measuring to Alabama football, 1, you're not improving yourself. And 2, Alabama's moving forward while you're still stuck. What's interesting is a couple of years ago, I was having a conversation with a couple trainers. There was a trainer at another school that does a lot of the training programs that Alabama does. It was a former coach that coached under Saban. And they said, we do that same program. We just don't seem to get the same results. And he said, what do you think that is? And I said, well, y'all do the program because we do it. We do it to make ourselves better. Big difference. You're doing it based on what you think we should do. We're doing it because we believe it makes us the separator. Got to change your mindset. This little thing that we have up here is the most powerful organism in the universe. It tells stories, it creates scenarios, it pulls on memories of the past, but it also defines opportunity. And opportunity is about a change of a mindset. But you're going to have people around you who tell you one thing or another. They're going to tell you you can't do it. You shouldn't do it. It's too hard. You're just more comfortable staying where you are. And those are the residents of Suckville. They want you there because it makes them feel better. And you have to understand that it's not that you don't listen to outside voices, but you also have to understand the intentions of those people around you. If their job is projecting their own anxieties on you, you need to be aware of that. Think about college basketball. Gonzaga up in the Northwest. Who decided that they were going to be one of the top 4 programs in the country year in and year out? They're not a blue blood program. They don't have a 50-year history of college basketball. They don't have 17 players in the NBA, and they don't have a Power 5 budget. But someone had a vision there years ago that they could be one of the best programs in the country. It's the same as coaches. It's the same as high schools. I'm sure there's teams that you coach against. There's organizations you coach against that have more resources. But how did they get those resources? My coach used to tell, or the assistant coach used to tell a story of my coach. He went back and spoke to the American Baseball Coaches Association meeting after he'd won his 3rd national title. And he had ended up winning 5, right? Yeah, 5. So he won his 3rd one. and he's supposed to speak to the entire coaching staff, all the coaches in the country. And he just laid out his program on the slide set. And the coaches and the assistant coach looked at it and said, "Bud, don't you think we need to take some of these things out of here? I mean, these are like our secrets." He said, "Nah, I'll leave it in there. 99% of them don't have the guts to do it. They'll just blame that they didn't have the money, they didn't have the recruits, or they didn't have the support." See, there's always somebody who has an answer or an excuse, right? So we got to be careful of the people who say we can't. Always look at their intentions. We got to build a better process. That should be a constant refinement. But to emerge out of Suckville, the goal is to succeed. It's about purpose, not prevention. It's not to endure, it's to dominate. And whatever we want to do, this life is a competition. There are winners and there are losers. Unfortunately, we've created a generation, back to the generational stuff, of participation trophies. I read a pretty interesting article that we're kind of being influenced right now by the Barney generation. Everybody loves everybody and everybody gets the ribbon at the end. And unfortunately, we can't live like that. There are winning and losing in life. And I'm not saying we have to take advantage of people. What I'm saying is that we have to find the best of ourselves. We don't need to overreact to the troublemakers in our lives. Instead, we need to guide people better. We need to teach people better. We need to respond to the stress that we have, because that's the challenge that we have. My goal for Suckville all along was to get us focused on the things that we can do, not the things that are building up around us, so that players, coaches, administrators, parents can understand that the biggest challenge that we have is finding our pathway and our process through the struggles that we have, versus thinking that the struggle is personal. It's not because we suck. It's not because it's unfair. It's not, yeah, life's unfair. We know that. Not everybody gets an equitable chance, but we still have the right to create where we are and to try to create the best that we can. We don't have to take our circumstances and make them own us. Whether we're sitting on the bench, we're not getting to play, our kid is upset, it doesn't matter. What are we going to do about it and build ourselves out of that Suckville is what's important. At the end of the day, we all have our own way of doing things. We all have our own psychological fingerprint. It's what makes you unique in the heat of the moment. It's what makes you unique in the way that you compete. It's what makes you unique in the way that you live your life. You are unique to you. That has been formed over years of interactions and experiences, as well as genetics. But every day we refine that. My mom was a twin sister. She had a twin sister. They're identical twins. If you look at pictures from them when they're 18, you literally cannot tell them apart, and she can't even tell herself apart. And yet, as they grew up, they both had very different idiosyncratic ways of doing things. They're identical DNAs, and yet they had differences, because we all develop our own way of doing things. And the only way that those things improve is through friction, struggle, and grind. And that's what we have to continue to improve. So when we take a look at what we're doing, at the end of the day, the best way to survive Suckville is to believe that you can handle anything that comes your way, that you can coach people to believe that they can handle it, not just by giving them platitudes and telling them you can do it, but teaching them the steps of which they can go so that they can jump from there. Because there is always a void between, there's always a gap between our tools and the challenge. What we've been living for so long is that we're falling short of our potential, but that gap is the application and the learning zone. So, any questions so far? Anything like that? Any feedback on the book? I would love to hear it if there are any. I can unmute you if you raise your hand. I made somebody hang up. No comments, no thoughts?
You know, Bhrett, I
Yep.
keep hearing over and over in my life after reading the book about you being you. And, you know, once I read that in the book, it's like almost everywhere I come up with, or other places or other things I read, it seems like to be such a huge thing. It's almost the biggest thing I got out of the book about how people get to the point of getting out of it.
You got to be who you are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can't be what somebody else is. You can't be If you're a coach, you can't be the coach that influenced you. You can't be what people want you to be. You have to have rules and guidelines, right? We can't step out of our social norms. But at the end of the day, we are who we are. I can't make you a left-handed person if you're right-handed.
Yeah.
I can't make you feel something that's different. But what you have to do is learn that you have the ability to continue to refine and improve and grow in the challenge. If I put puzzle pieces down on a board and said, solve it, you'd probably work on it. Now, if it was really, really hard, you may quit. If it got too hard and you're like, this is a waste of time. Now, if I said, if you can solve this, you win $1 million, you probably wouldn't quit. But if I told you that great people in your field can do this in 4 minutes, just completely make up an arbitrary number and add that pressure of validation, you'd get paralyzed. That last one is what we create in our head, that other people should do it faster. I should do it because other people do it better than me. It just paralyzes us. Solve it the way you solve it. Do it your way. And if you're confident enough to do that and accept the good, the bad, and the ugly with it, you'll grow. Sometimes we have to acclimate. I'm not the normal psychologist. I've never been that way. I've never wanted to be that way. I like to wear shorts and no shoes when I'm working. And I don't want to be in an office. I don't want to do things like that. I don't use a lot of psychological terms. That's not how I learn. So when I first started in this industry, I tried to be like everybody else that had come before me. And I finally said, screw it, that doesn't work. I'll just be who I am. And if you're authentic in who you are, it usually works. It doesn't mean it's right for everybody. There are people who like Burger King better than McDonald's. There are people who like BMWs better than Mercedes. There are people who like American Airlines better than Delta. God only knows why they would, but they do. So, yes, Barry. Hold on, let me get you off mute.
I got it.
You got it. Okay.
Yeah. So, I'm a dad of a 17-year-old boy. He's a junior, and sometimes he'll shoot 69, things are going well. But then he can shoot, 81, 85. And I try to tell him it's not about the result, it's about the process, right? And so if you start spinning your head like that, and he's got a coaching call with you on November the 1st, which I'm pretty excited about. So we just got introduced to and I was listening to one of your videos of we bought the original, one of the courses that you have. He's talking about the 5 different players.
Yep.
And that was really good. But when you've got an amped up player, because we believe he's that, and people are telling him to just stay calm.
Yeah,
I know, and I've always thought of that, but I'm like, man, I play golf, but I grew up playing sports that he says aren't thinking sports, right?
Yeah.
So reaction.
Yeah, reaction. But at the same time, too, I mean, I will tell you this: a couple years ago, well, 2 years ago, when Mac Jones took over for Tua Tagovailoa at Alabama, the first time I met with Mac, I sent a note up and I said, "Don't calm this kid down. He doesn't fit into the box of being a cerebral thinker. He's very, very smart, but he's also very fidgety. He's very anxious. He moves around a lot. He likes to talk. He talks trash. Don't make him go in the box." And they were like, "Oh, no, that's not how we do it." I'm like, well, AJ McCarron had no problem with it. Let this kid be who he is. And he put up the best year ever in Alabama football. I think we have to be who we are, right? One of the problems that we don't do in any sport, and we'll pick on golf for a minute, but baseball pitching is very similar, even shooting and basketball. We all seem to anticipate our A game, but there's really an A game, a B game, and a C game. There's a D and an F too. Okay, but we're not going to talk about those. But those happen. You put out 100 scores, 100 days, you're going to have some D's and F's. Okay. The U.S. Open that Brian Harman almost won, came in second to Brooks Koepka and led for 63 holes. He came in dead last before the cut at the Memorial or Memphis, one of those two, dead last. Like went home before, I mean, he was done. He went home, reset, refocused, got back out there, and he was flawless. Didn't change anything, just a different week. So what you have to learn to do is when you have your B game is not be searching for your A game. And sometimes it's okay to say, I have my C game right now. Not, why do I have my C game? Let me call my coach. And then as parents, we want to get on the phone with the coach immediately afterwards. And I know there's a couple of golf coaches on here who've probably gotten those text messages in the middle of a round going, oh my God, he just missed a 4-footer. Like, what are we doing? Like, he's competing. He's trying. Like, give him time. And instead of reacting, is like, hey, maybe we have our C game. I had a kid that went through, he's going into final stage now at Q school. In his first stage, he got out there and he goes, I don't know what the hell just happened. I didn't have my swing, but I just kind of downshifted into a spinny little cut off the tee and I hit 14 fairways. He wasn't like, oh my God, I don't have my swing. I'm not going to have it next week. It was, I didn't have it. I just downshifted it, played it around. Maybe I gave up 15 yards off the tee, but I was in the middle of every fairway. And that's a skill that's not changing. We're not changing and searching, but we're saying, this is what it is right now, and I'll deal with it later. I still got to get the ball in the hole. And I've watched pitchers, I've watched hitters, I've watched golfers, I've watched basketball players. They change what they're doing because their early success isn't good, and then they start cycling versus going, it is what it is. So if you don't have your shot in basketball, the easiest thing to do is drive or play great defense. Well, golf, you can't do that, but you can by playing smarter versus trying to validate the work you've done in. Most players on the PGA Tour will tell you they have their A game 4 or 5 times a year for a day, not a week, not a weekend. And they just hope they're in a position that it hits at the right time. Hopefully their A game didn't show up when they started a Sunday in 70th. But sometimes it does, right? But they have to just take what they have every day and make the most of it. I think as coaches, we have a responsibility to not teach to the A game. You know, we need to not go, hey man, this is looking the best I've ever seen it. Go out there and take care of business. No, listen, when it's good, it's really good. What are you going to do if it's not great? What are you going to do if you got your C game? Hey, we're getting ready to take off on an airplane right now. In case of crash landing, these are the things I want you to be prepared for. That's how we need to coach players. Look, when it's good, it's real good. It's easy. What are you going to think about? But when it's not, what are you going to do? Because I think it creates a little bit of false hope sometimes versus saying, look, do you have a shot to go to? Do you have a pitch to throw when you don't have your best stuff? You know, we used to have what we called a BP fastball. We couldn't get our control over our fastball. We'd throw a little mover. Well, in golf, not many people have fairway finders. I don't know how to get a ball in play when they don't have it. And so those are the things you got to look at. That's a skill, that's a higher level skill. Now, but we're not measuring talent. Remember, the success formula is talent, application under pressure, mental flexibility, and luck. If it was just talent, we'd stop at talent. It's not. A lot of talented kids out there that can't get it done. And there's a lot of under-talented kids that seem to always find a way to get it done because that's all they got. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes, Dora. I'm gonna unmute you. Well, it says, can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me now? Oh, hi.
Yep, gotcha. Hi.
I had the pleasure of hearing you at the Gatorade National meeting and became a groupie from there.
A groupie, thank you.
I have an 18-year-old son who's been playing baseball since he was 4 years old. And as you talk about that long journey, and now we're in that, recruiting process, and there's so much doubt, right? Because now you're going out there and you're seeing all these other kids that are just as talented as you, or maybe their ride was easier than yours. Like, what's your advice just in like keeping them calm through this process?
So the traditional answer I give in any kind of recruiting is it's like a middle school dance. You got the boys and the girls on both sides of the gym, and somebody's afraid to talk to each other, and all you do is think that somebody's thinking something bad about you because you don't understand. You don't know what coaches are looking for. You don't understand their money proposition. Yeah. Particularly in baseball, you get 11.7 scholarships. Men's golf gets 4.5. There's not enough to fill out the roster. So it's not like men's basketball. I'm not knocking men's basketball, but they can bury kids on that roster just to not go somewhere else. Baseball, they can't do that, right? So when you hear people say they got a full ride, it's usually not a full ride. It's a full according to that coach, and they're piecing money together. I played 1 year of varsity baseball. I got held back, and I didn't commit to where I was going until April of my senior year. And even that was a gift. It wasn't like I was recruited. I didn't go on one recruiting trip. And so the things I always say is you start where you're going to feel the best, either the best development or the best opportunities to grow and learn, whether it's playing time or not. You can always transfer. I wouldn't say that in the recruiting phase, but you can always listen. Coaches can leave you. You can leave coaches too. As long as you handle it appropriately and go in the transfer portal and don't talk behind their back and you leave without burning bridges, I don't have a problem with a player saying, you know what, this is great, but I feel like I need to go somewhere closer to home, or, you know, I had a good year and I have an opportunity now to transfer up, whatever. Don't ever listen to what other people say they got from a coach. You don't know. And you don't know why they're recruiting a player. So you may look at them and say, I'm better than that kid. And you might be, but you don't know who's in their pipeline or what coach is in that one or what that coach sees. One thing about coaches, and I'm not knocking college coaches, I love them, but college coaches at the core are developers. They're helpers. So sometimes they see kids that they can influence and they can help. And so for some reason, they may have a belief in a kid that they see that reminds them of themselves or reminds them of a kid that they have, and they've just got a soft spot for, and they see them and they like them. They're playing hunches because they don't know how you're going to play. But there are certain intangibles that college coaches are always looking for. Great team members who can serve the team over themselves, that can take care of their business without being overly, having to be over guardianed, having too many guardians around them, so they can go to class, they can take care of their business, they're not going to be a trouble, and that they're coachable, that they listen and they engage. If you do those things, those are the intangibles. But you can't, the middle school dance analogy is you can't play for the coaches or the scouts because you don't know what they're looking for. Go out there, give it your best, hustle in and off the field, play your best, fight through trouble, show them that you can handle struggle better than you can handle success. If you can show them those things and they can see in the dugout that you are helping somebody else, no matter what you did today, they're all about it. At the end of the day, they're going to look for certain skills. They're going to look for run fast, throw fast, hit hard, all that. Then they backfill with character kids. Nobody can put 30 superstars on their roster, not in college baseball.
Thank you, Dr. McCabe.
You got it. You got it. By the way, so you always got to have something in the works, right? So I've got two next things I'm working on. Number one is how to take the practice game to the competitive environment and kind of blowing up some of these myths. But the second one is Suckville. It's a Suckville analogy for parents. I gave a talk last week in Southern California, and a couple of people came up to me afterwards and said, will you please write a book on parenting? I always laughed when I see people write a book on parenting that aren't parents. It's kind of a weird one, but I am a parent. But I'm gonna write a book on how to manage the kids' Suckville and how to be the best positive influence. It doesn't mean that we don't have high demands and high standards. It doesn't mean that we don't sit there and expect a lot of our kids. It doesn't mean that we're their best cheerleader, but it also doesn't mean we pack their lunches and we pack their clothes every day before they go play. And in golf, if you're a golfing parent, don't carry your kid's bag to the tournament. And if you're a baseball parent, don't carry their bat bag. Because if they can hold it, they can carry it. And so it's a variety of those things. So those are the things I've got in works. I'm hoping that the parenting one will be a little bit easier to write. My goal always within the company is to write one book a year. This one took the brunt of me for 3 years, but that's the goal. And so as long as it's good quality products, I'm going to keep trying to write. I love to write. I hope it resonates. I'm not short-winded. I know that. I know my books tend to be chewier, but that's just the way that I am. As Tony said, I just got to be who I am. That's what I am. So with that, let's have a great week. Thank you for y'all's support. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thanks for allowing me to do what I love to do, which is write, coach, lead, and impact kids' lives and impact players' lives and coach and being a part of coaches' journeys and parents' journeys. So thank you. With that, signing off, and y'all have a great week.